Firstly, thank you very much, Phil, for taking the time to join today on Idea Drops Innovations Insight. I think it'd be great to start to get a quick introduction to yourself, Phil, and obviously more about your background and your career. So a little bit about you to kick off.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, well, thanks for asking me to be here. So yeah, I'm Phil Jennings. I'm the Chief Executive of the Innovation Agency, which is one of the 15 academic health science networks in the UK. So my personal background, so I'm a medic by background, went to university in Newcastle in the northeast of England, trained as a physician cardiologist for a little while working in the northeast, and then I moved down here to Merseyside quite a few years ago now and retrained as a primary care doctor. So I've been a GP in this area ever since. And since being a GP, I kind of got involved from the start really with different types of service redesign. I suppose that's initially what got me interested in change management, and then kind of quality improvement initiatives, and then ultimately innovation. So through my career, I've worked in different types of leadership or management roles. So again, the people listening in the UK will know about structures like PCTs or CCGs, all of which have at one point or another been part of the management architecture of the NHS. And so I've been fortunate enough to work in quite a few of those. So kind of had a fairly good idea of how the NHS works and operates. But now I'm very much working in the innovation space. So my job is, along with colleagues, to try and shorten the gap between new innovations. So whether that's a product or maybe a clinical pathway or a new drug, it's shortening the time from discovery to get that in the hands of frontline clinicians, because that's something that's always been a challenge for us.
Thank you. And presumably, and no doubt that has become an even bigger or greater challenge over the last 12 months with the COVID-19 pandemic. And have you seen a shift or an acceleration in innovation but because of that? Because I suppose the world is in turmoil. I don't know how that's impacted how you've been able to move things forward.
Yeah, it's been a really challenging time, hasn't it, for all of us? I think one of the only comforts that we can take from the COVID pandemic is it has allowed us to rapidly roll out a number of new innovations, which I think under normal circumstances would have taken, years, but we've rolled out in weeks or months. So again, you'll be aware that the practice of medicine is changed, and much like this interview today over Zoom, we're both in our homes. Again, we've been consulting with patients in their homes rather than them coming up to surgeries or hospitals. So in the UK, we've seen the deployment of 2 kind of digital platforms to assist staff to be able to do that. So 2 separate platforms, one in primary care and one in secondary care, which have allowed some digital consultations to take place. And as well, we've seen the kind of general format of booking an appointment with a doctor or a nurse change. So again, most places now have moved on to kind of a total triage model. So you tend to have a conversation with someone first who explores what your needs might be before directing you maybe to the correct professional. So that's not always a doctor. And again, increasingly now it's a much broader workforce, especially in primary care. So we've seen that rolled out. And then equally, I think in response to COVID itself, there's some initiatives that have been really helpful there. So a couple of examples, we've been working with a company called Safe Steps, who they initially produced an app for use in residential homes. And it was a falls risk assessment tool, but the company managed to rapidly repurpose that during COVID. And it's now also a COVID tracker. So we've been helping to get that deployed across our region so that care homes can more easily collect data on their residents, and we can see patterns and trends emerging. So that helps us to target, treatment and now more likely vaccinations where they're most needed. Another example would be something called Needle Smart. So Needle Smart's been around for a little while. It's actually a sharps disposal device. It's very neat. You put your needle in the top of it after giving an injection, and the needle's superheated in a matter of seconds into just a little blob, which could no longer cause an injury to anyone. So that's been around, but what's happened over COVID is that's now coupled with a digital vaccination service. So the actual process of putting the needle into the machine sends a message which says who's been vaccinated by what vaccine, by which vaccine, who did it, the date, the time, and it's allowing us to digitally track patients through that journey. And then finally, I think my last example, there's a couple of really big initiatives that we've been involved in. One's called oximetry at home, and this is where we are now distributing pulse oximeters, little machines that sit on your finger that measure your oxygen levels, out to patients who've been diagnosed with COVID who are at higher risk. And again, that then allows us to monitor them in their own homes and hopefully keep patients out of hospital if they don't need to come in, but also to detect early signs of deterioration. And then the kind of opposite to that is another initiative called virtual wards at home. And this is for patients who are in hospital, but it allows us to get them discharged back to their homes sooner than they would otherwise. And again, that's with some remote monitoring and daily check-ins to see how they're getting on. So it's been really busy during COVID trying to get all of that kind of repurposed, and certainly a lot of our routine work has been postponed, but rightly so. So yeah, we've, as an organisation, have had to kind of pivot to address the COVID need.
Yeah, thank you. It's fascinating. It sounds actually as if there's a lot of the innovations, or the fast deployed innovations, are things that were already there, and you've kind of there's been a utilization or a repurpose to fit, and that pace has come from need, hasn't it? Which is quite understandable. Do you think that pace will continue, Bill, as well, or is it? Do you think that people sort of seeing how quickly you can move it will hopefully maintain some of that sort of speed in the future?
Well, I hope so. And I mean, I guess that it's been a powerful demonstrator of what can be done when it's really necessary. I think obviously there's a limit in terms of how hard people can work. And again, a lot of people have put in extra time and effort. So there's a personal toll that takes. And we've also had a set of emergency legislation, which has helped us to overcome some of the barriers that would have maybe stalled some of the innovations under routine operating. I think particularly around some of the data regulations, it has allowed us to move a lot further and faster under this emergency period. So I think perhaps to carry on at this pace is unrealistic, but it does at least show what can be done when we put our minds to it. And there's no doubt that we can become much quicker and slicker at that process from discovery to deployment. I think really, as I said, that's what we're all about as academic health science networks.
But it's nice that technology can be used more effectively and deployed. And it sounds like a lot of the stuff actually, just sort of sidetrack, but it's it'll continue to be used. So actually,
oh yeah, I hope so. I mean, a lot of the stuff that we're doing now with the oximeters, it's a demonstrator about long-term conditions. So COVID might go away, but asthma and COPD and heart failure are here. And some of that technology that we're using for COVID will be directly applicable to those long-term conditions. So I think things will never quite be the same again. So I very much hope some of that learning from COVID we can carry forward into our more routine practice in the future, for sure.
Nice. Great. Well, the next question, I'll ask it anyway, but it's just around innovation management, management process. So, so Phil, it'd be great to better understand if you have an innovation management process within the innovation agency itself, but actually even and further than that, because your role as an organisation is to capture that innovation from practitioners and institutes within your area.
Yeah. Yeah, sure. I mean, I can tell you a little bit about that. I think not least because we are now trying to become a bit more structured in terms of how we address innovation. And that one of the reasons for that is there is no shortage of innovation. There are literally hundreds of thousands of good ideas out there. And one of our challenges is trying to pick out the ones that have got real potential that we can sponsor and get through the system as quickly as we can. So I think it's worth considering where the innovations come from. So I think generally speaking, there are a number of routes where we tend to meet innovations or innovators. So first of all, that's from the product of academic research or through one of our research partners. The next route would be from entrepreneurs. So that's both clinical entrepreneurs. So that might be, a doctor or a nurse or other healthcare professional who's got a great idea that we can help to develop both that person and also their idea, but also entrepreneurs in the community. So again, I think the final source of our innovations comes from commercial sector, and that can be a tiny startup, again, someone with a great idea, or it could be an established medtech firm or pharmaceutical partner. So we deal with all of those different approaches, and what we try to do now is take those thousands and thousands of ideas through a pipeline where we gradually refine each one and end up with probably just maybe 2 or 3 great ideas that we can then try and roll out each year. And so sometimes that's just a process of looking at whether we need, for instance, some additional clinical advice. So we'll bring clinical experts to bear and give advice on a particular, product or program. Sometimes that's regulatory advice. So again, particularly if you've got a new device, that will need to go through the various different regulatory frameworks to be able to be used, in this country or many others around the world. And often the other thing that new innovations are lacking is some form of evidence. So again, most innovators haven't got, a randomized, multi-center, multinational trial behind them. So increasingly, we're trying to use a rapid evaluation cycle so we can gain some early patient safety and efficacy data, and then use that to build on slightly larger programs of research and evaluation. And then finally, for those 2 or 3, we use our network. So again, in my region, we've got networks into our local healthcare system. So we've got people we can approach in our GP surgeries or hospital trusts in terms of new ideas. But importantly, and I think in terms of trying to scale up innovation, my organisation, the Innovation Agency, works in partnership with another 14 academic health science networks across England. And we have a very strong AHSN network where we meet regularly, share ideas, and we do put forward innovations to our national commissioners to become national programs that all 15 can then roll out. And that's the key to getting real pace in terms of spread and adoption across the country.
Yeah, fantastic. It's quite interesting. So particularly if you get, and have you seen much experience or evidence of that, of ideas that have come through locally and undiscovered, deployed, tested, and then had sort of national sort of framework adoption? Is that starting to become more commonplace?
Yeah, so certainly in the last few years, we've had a series of national, both programs and products. And again, there's examples there in both elements where there are commissioners who are NHS England, NHS Improvement, and the Office for Life Sciences. They'll task the network of AHSNs to roll out particular programs or products. And again, that spans the big and the small. So it could be literally a single device that we're working with the commissioners to accelerate the adoption, or it could be a big program of change, again, around a long-term condition. So, cardiovascular disease or something like that. So it's both the big and the small. And sometimes it is literally a case of raising awareness or demonstrating a new device. Whereas at other times, it's working with teams, it's perhaps doing some training, education. There's often, that's coupled with some quality improvement work as well. So those can be, 1 year, 2 year, 3 year programs in depending on which one we're looking at.
And presumably with such a large and complex infrastructure within the healthcare network. What are the sort of the main challenges you face, and I guess we just mentioned nationally, but on a regional basis, actually getting those ideas implemented? Are you struggling to get, I suppose, share a voice in those organizations, particularly at the minute because they're so operationally focused? Is it hard to get the ideas into those businesses and being used?
Well, it's a challenge, yes, because, there's not really ever a quiet day in the NHS. And clearly during COVID, NHS staff have worked harder than ever. And so creating the space for innovation is a challenge. It's difficult, particularly when there are such obvious operational pressures. I think if you look outside of COVID and into our kind of more routine work, most of our NHS partners now recognise the importance of innovation. So most of our hospital trusts will have an innovation lead at the very least. And in fact, some of our trusts are much more developed and they have a whole team which is tasked with innovation. And again, for a hospital trust who can promote its own ideas, that becomes potentially a commercial investment opportunity for them. And we have trusts at various different stages in our patch, and I suppose that's the same across the country. And then moving over into primary care, again, there's a lot of reorganisation happening at the moment. So again, rather than individual surgeries working alone, again, they're working now in groups of practices that we call primary care networks. And again, for primary care networks, it's again really key that we can link in with innovation leads there. So we've got a route into primary care, which after all is where most of the activity of the NHS occurs. So it's really important that they don't lose out on the, the developments around innovation.
Fantastic. And a question on actually innovation. It's interesting. We obviously work in innovation as well, and it's when innovation is kind of in your company description and your job title and everything you do, it almost loses a little bit of its impact at times. But it's trying to understand, I guess, within the innovation agency that you run, Phil, how do you create that ethos and sort of culture of innovation with your own staff? Because it's easy to talk about it, but it's also that they're going through lots of challenges and change as well.
Yeah, it is. But I'm really fortunate. I mean, we've got a great team and they're very, very diverse. So there are obviously, as you might expect, people with an NHS background like myself, but then looking at the rest of the team, we have people who've got all kinds of different backgrounds, including commercial and research backgrounds, because unlike other NHS organisations, AHSNs are specifically tasked with generating economic growth in their areas, and clearly there's a very strong link between the economic vibrancy of a region and its health, and we've understood that for a long time. And in fact, often the best medical intervention is giving someone a job if we're working in an area where there's very, very high deprivation. So it's particularly important in my area in the northwest of England. So a very strong component of our work is around economic investment, regeneration, and trying to attract people to come and set up companies in the northwest of England, or for us to attract large research initiatives into our hospitals and primary care. So in order to do that, I do need a team of varying different skills and background, and we're really fortunate because we haven't got a clinical duty, so we're not operationally active seeing patients. And again, we all recognise how fortunate we are to have that time and space to think about which innovations might potentially help our college best. And that's what makes it such a good place to work and creates that kind of great atmosphere. And we need to try and take some of that and, instill it into our colleagues on the clinical coalface. But again, I think from my experience, clearly working with colleagues who are operationally active, they see the value of innovation, and it's just a case of sometimes being able to show them what's out there and what their potential for change might be.
Brilliant, thank you. And final question from our side, and it's really to, and you touched upon it maybe perhaps already, but you talked about some of the innovations that have currently being deployed. The question is there anything that you're really excited about, that, you know, something very new and different that we're going to see in 2021, you think that's going to change how your world operates?
So I think that's hard in terms of maybe a single product or pathway, but there are clearly themes emerging which I think will shape the course of the kind of near to medium term. I mean, I think the first one there is digital. Digital is a bit of a misnomer because it kind of incorporates all kinds of things. So if I was to unpack that slightly, part of digital is just the electronic way of doing our business. So we've talked about remote consultations, for instance, but equally there's many other ways that digital platforms or information can help people look after themselves and support their own care. And again, I think that's going to be an increasingly important factor moving forward. But the other thing that digital means for me is data. And we're in a very data-rich era, and the amount of data that we're generating is just increasing exponentially every single day. But we don't really utilize that. We've already in the NHS held vast quantities of data across our population from birth to death. But the insights that is largely locked away at this point in time. But I think as time evolves, as we get better at using large data sets, we'll be in a position where we can predict the course of a disease much, much more accurately. And then that will get us on the front foot and be able to take preventative action in many cases. So I think as we start to share data better, and again, that involves a conversation with the public in terms of which of their health data, which is particularly important to most people, how much of that they're willing to share. So that's a challenge for us and a conversation that we need to have. But I think if we can get to a point where we do share lots of routine, probably anonymized data, that will create enormous insights for researchers and for frontline clinicians. And so you could see in the future how your computer system, rather than just recording what you're doing with a patient, would be flagging things up to you to say, well, actually, you know, based on the experience with others, this person is at risk of one thing or another, and you may wish to make this intervention or prescribe that medicine. And I think that will really change how we practice. I think my second theme would be the kind of genomic revolution that we've seen over the last few years. So we were very much involved in something called the 100,000 Genomes Project here in the UK, which was an initiative to map 100,000 genomes. In the first instance, in cases of cancer and rare diseases, it was a very large UK initiative, and again has given us one of the largest genomic databases anywhere in the world. And that technology is becoming ever more rapid and widespread and affordable. So again, I think in the future, we'll regularly see genomic sequencing, perhaps not a whole genome, but certainly targeted sequences, which will help us to inform care. I think people will be becoming routinely having parts of their genome sequenced when it comes to the prescription of some of the kind of, you know, very commonly prescribed medications. And that's my final point, would be personalized medicine. So again, at the minute, we're in a very much of a kind of an empirical phase of medicine. So we conduct large studies and we look at the evidence that shows us, but unfortunately, that doesn't always translate to the patient, the single patient who we have in front of us. And actually, you know, the chances of us replicating the results in a trial are fairly low. So even when I prescribe a medication in good faith, you know, a third of the time that might get the effects that I'm expecting. Another third, it maybe doesn't have any effect. And in the worst case scenario, perhaps I even do harm. So I think as we progress with better understanding of how drugs are metabolized, how the genes that we all have code for drug metabolism, we'll be able to start to tailor bespoke prescriptions of doses and medications to individuals in a far more advanced way than we do at the moment. And again, that'll be a radical change to how we currently practice. And that's not too far away. So again, that's not technology that we're going to see in the next few years, but hopefully within my lifetime of practice in medicine, we'll start to see some of those changes taking effect.
Fantastic. Thank you. That's brilliant. That's brought us to the end.